Sons of Encouragement, Chapter 2, Part 1. Part 1. Amos had never heard the voice before, but the marrow in his bones and the blood that ran in his veins recognized it. His body shook as God whispered, I am. The air he inhaled tingled in his lungs as though he had been dead and now suddenly came to life. Throwing himself on his face, Amos covered his head with his hands. Elohim, El Elyon, El Roy, power and majesty above all gods, king of all creation. A quickening lit Amos's soul. He was in God's presence, surrounded by him, immersed in his spirit, imbued by him. Even as Amos tried to flatten himself on the earth, he was fully exposed. God knew everything about him, from first thought to final terror. Adonai, Kodosh, Yisrael, El Olam, head over all, Holy One of Israel, everlasting God. Amos cried out in fear and pleaded for his life, his voice muffled against the grass-covered earth. He had fled Jerusalem in anger and despair, doubting God even existed, let alone saw or cared what happened in his holy city. He had even cast blame upon the Lord for the sins of men committed against one another, and now this, surely God would kill him. Yahweh, Sedukenu, Yahweh, Shammah, Atik Yomi. Righteous God, present always, ancient of days, ruler of all, judge of the nations. No more, I am a dead man. You live. Amos wept, the dry heart within him fluttering and drowning in the flood of revelation. See, hear. Amos felt lifted by unseen hands. He saw the temple on Mount Zion. There was a sound like a lion's roar, but it wasn't like any lion Amos had ever heard as he guarded his sheep in the wilderness. This roar was filled with wrath. The sound grew louder, making the hair rise on the back of his neck and his blood go cold. Even if the land felt the sound for the ground, even the land felt the sound, for the ground rippled and rose and fell like a blanket, shaken clean. Though people screamed and ran, they could not escape judgment. Thunder crashed from Jerusalem and came down like a wave, filling the fields, valleys, and plains. The sky turned bronze. The lush pastures of Mount Carmel withered and died. Streams dried. Waterholes evaporated, their basins crackling, leaving nothing but dust. Sheep, cattle, goats lay dead, carrion birds picking at the dying carcasses. Confused, trembling with fear, Amos found himself in the midst of it. The unrelenting sun beat down on his head, wilting to the ground. He pounded like a deer thirsting for water. And the word came to him. Blessings and curses written down generations ago, long forgotten. His mind drank in living water. Opening his eyes, Amos found himself on his knees. Raising his head, he looked around. Everything was as it had been. The rich pasture, the water hole, his pack just where he dropped it. Bowing his head to the ground, he sobbed in relief. Had it been a dream? A thought turned sour in his mind. The voice? He had not imagined the voice, or had he? Weak-kneed, Amos rose and went to the stream. Hunkering down, he cupped his hands and splashed water over his face. Maybe he had a fever. I have given you a vision of what is to come. But why? Why me? What good would showing a poor shepherd do? It is in my power to change anything? No. Amos rubbed his eyes, wishing he could rub away the images that still flickered in his mind. He heard the echo of the lion's roar and the screams in his head. Sinking back on his heels, he waited until his heart slowed its wild beat, and then his breathing calmed. On shaking legs, he went back to the waterhole. Work would make him feel better. Work would fill his mind. He spent the last hours of daylight cutting and pulling reeds that he might spread and choke the water hole. His sheep must have good water to drink. Cool, still waters were best, for the ripples of a stream frightened them. They were determined he was not to think about the vision. The more determined he was not to think about the vision, the more his mind turned back to it again and again and again, over and over. It held his mind captive. Amos rubbed his eyes, wishing he could rub away the images that still flickered in his mind. He heard the echo of the lion's roar. When the sun cast a spear of color in the west, he set up his camp and sat in the doorway of the small tent. He had not eaten since early morning. Though he had little appetite, he forced himself to eat a small barley cake, a few dates, and sycamore figs. A wolf howled. Brush rustled close by. Wind whispered softly. Night fell away in a blaze of light. And Amos knew, "No, Lord, please," he groaned as he felt his hands lifting him again. Weariness fell away and his entire being awakened, absorbing everything around him. Remember Gilead. Horror filled him. "No, Lord, please. I know what happened there." He stood in the midst of the people running. They screamed and scattered as the Armenian army advanced. Warriors swung their swords, making no distinction between men, women, and children. They came like sledges, scraping over the wounded, crushing them beneath their feet. The ground drank Israel's blood. Amos covered his face. "Stop them, Lord, stop them!" He could hear screams of terror, cries of pain, and moans of the dying. Sobbing, Amos covered his ears. A man raised his hand in a plea for mercy just as a soldier lopped his arm off and then hacked him down with glee. Amos longed to grab a sword and fight back, but he could not move. He could only see, hear, smell, carnage, everywhere carnage. Ben-Hadad of Damascus, king of Aram, shouted commands, "Kill the vermin, kill them all." Warriors beat down the people of Gilead like stalks of wheat, cut, threshed, and blown to the wind. When the attack ended, brutal laughter echoed across the devastated land. Ben-Hadad rode over the body of a child, his first fist raised in triumph as though defying the God of heaven and earth. Bodies floated in the sun, flies buzzed, maggots squirmed. The smell of death filled Amos's nostrils. My people, my people. Sobbing, he dropped to his knees and wrenched violently. When the wave of sickness passed, he raised his head slowly, exhausted. All was peaceful. Above him, stars shone brightly against the canopy of night. Anger swelled. "Why didn't you save them? They were your people." He raised his arms and cried out, "Why do you show me these things?" The people of Damascus have sinned again and again, and I will not let them go unpunished. Relief flooded him, and then exultation. The Lord would avenge those who had been butchered in Gilead. Amos jumped up and spread his arms wide. "Yes, Lord, yes! Let them feel the edge of the sword," he cried out as he saw a consuming fire coming down from heaven, blackening the walls of a huge fortress, devouring the mighty gates of a great city. "Yes, lay waste to them as they did in Gilead," he cheered, ecstatic. "Terrify them, shatter them like earthenware." Men battled in a great valley. Blades crashed, horns sounded, chariot wheels broke, spilling warriors into the fray. Horses reared and screamed, trampling their masters as the king who had threshed Gilead fell by the sword. The Armenian king lay dying, eyes staring up at heaven as he uttered a last curse against God. Screams of pain rent the air as conquerors drove hooks through the noses of the survivors, looped the ropes through the rings, tying the captives together. Amos watched the Armenians be led away like cattle, a long line of them being dragged away to Kir. "Yes, Lord, so be it. Let them reap what they have sown." "Did you enjoy this vision, my child?" "Yes, Lord, yes." How long had he and the others longed to do to them as they had done to the people of Gilead? His mind and heart drank in the vision of vengeance without the thought of where it might lead. or if it was pleasing to God. Nor did he think all about the stillness that surrounded him after he had made his confession. He thought about the last vision and thought about it, savoring it. Let it be soon, Lord. Let it be soon. Amos awakened to rain pattering softly. He lay face up like the dead king, staring into the darkness. The cool drops soothed his burning face. The rain stopped. Amos spread his fingers against the ground and found it dry. Groaning, he sat up and felt his face. It was dry and hot. A fever, nothing more. Pushing himself up, he held his head. His stomach ached with emptiness. How long had he been unconscious? How long since he had eaten? He saw his script where he had dropped it. Taking it up, he pinched off a piece of barley bread. After a mouthful, he retied the script to his sash. Parched, he went down on his hands and knees and drank like a sheep from the stream. He wanted to get away from this place of dreams. Grabbing his pack, his staff, and his club, he took the route toward Jericho. He would look over the pastures between here and the sycamore groves and make certain there were no poisonous plants, or his mind wandered. He had heard stories of Jonah, who had not been able to run from God, and there were stories of how the prophet had boarded the ship to Tarshish only to be tossed overboard during a storm and then swallowed by a huge fish that finally vomited him onto the beach. Go to Nineveh, God had told Jonah. It didn't matter how far Jonah ran or how deep in the hull of a ship he might hide. God knew where he was and what he wanted him to do. Relentless. God is relentless. Bani said Jonah still lived outside the walled city, waiting for destruction to come. Amos shook his head. Why did he think about that now? Rumors, probably. A story his brother had heard from a traveling merchant, nothing more. Please let it be nothing more. Reaching the next pasture, Amos surveyed the grasses. Walking the field, he pulled up the poisonous weeds and bundled them. Stacking the bundles on rocky soil, he set them on fire and watched the smoke rise and heard a whisper. I will remove evil from the land. Amos pressed his hands over his ears. It's just the wind and the grass. After a long moment, he drew his hands away tentatively and heard nothing but the crackling fire. When the flames died down and only embers remained, Amos scooped dirt over them so that no sparks could float into the good grass that remained. He moved on the next morning. Even as he tried to concentrate on work, the weeds, the water holes, his thoughts kept circling back to the voice that came from without and within. Part of him waited for the Lord to speak. Again, dreading it, longing for it. He prayed he would hear it again, and yet he feared he would. When God spoke to a man, it was to send the poor fool on a mission or a long journey or to his death. His heart warred within him. Amos worked harder, faster. He forgot to eat until his stomach was gripped with pain. He moved on again. When he reached the next pasture, he sat beneath the terebinth tree and did nothing. The sky grew dark before he got up and entered the sheepfold he had built 2 years before. A snake, slithered hissing from the wall, startling him. Angry, he used his staff to break into its hiding place, loop it with a crook, and drop it on the ground, where he killed it with his club. Even with his head crushed, the body writhed. Moments later came the words, I am the Lord your God. Clutching his head, he wailed, Why do you speak to me, Lord? I'm a sinful man. I give you offerings to avoid trouble, not to praise your name. I despise your priests. I can't wait to get out of your holy city. I can't stand being around your people. Words of confession spilled from his lips. Doubt had consumed him since he was a boy. Doubts that had grown into contempt for God's servants. Hadn't he thirsted for revenge after seeing his father weep over debts owed and the only manner in which he could repay them? The priests served God, didn't they? If they represented God, then God must be to blame. All my life, I've been part of schemes and thievery. When I wanted to do right, I caused trouble for my brothers and their families. He saw the bigger truth now. It came to him like a lamp in a dark cave, showing the secret sins he failed to see in himself. The trouble I've caused had nothing to do with me striving for righteousness. It came from hate. I wanted to cut the bonds that held my family captive to the priests, not because they were wrong, but because my pride rebelled. I've hated them, and I have hated you because of what they do in your name. Sobbing, he confessed every sin he remembered and knew there were thousands more he wouldn't even know. I'm a sinful man, Lord, a sinful man deserving of death. Eyes tightly closed, he bowed his head to the ground. Do not fear. I knew you before I formed you in your mother's womb. You are mine. Amos waited. His muscles slowly relaxed. His stomach stopped churning. He waited a long time before he raised his head enough to see around him, and even longer yet before he dared stand. He closed his eyes in gratitude. Holy is the Lord, and abounding in mercy. When he lay down again, he slept the rest of the night without dreams. Amos did not hear the voice again until he was working in the sycamore groves. Others worked around him, talking, laughing, but not hearing. Grasping a fig, he made a small cut. He felt the air grow warm around him. Everything went still. Sounds faded. The people of Gaza have sinned again and again, and I will not let them go unpunished. Amos saw the Philistines leading whole villages of Israelites away from their burning homes. Using whips, they forced people to march to Edom, where they sold them as slaves. Indignation choked him. Our brothers make profit on our misery. Edomites were descendants of Jacob's brother Esau. Should one brother purchase another as slave, Lord? He hated the Edomites as much as he hated the Philistines, and so was vaguely disappointed when he saw fire descend only on the walls of Gaza and not Edom as well. An invading army from the north slaughtered everyone in Gaza and then marched on to Ascalon. Ekron was the last to fall and lay ruined like Gath. A few survivors of the nation that had often opposed Israel fell, dissolved into dust, and blew away in the wind, leaving only an echo of Philistia's grandeur. So be it, Lord, Amos rejoiced, so be it. Amos! He blinked and swayed slightly on the ladder and grasped hold of a sycamore branch to keep from falling. What? What, you say? What's the matter with you, my friend? Jashobeam, the owner of the grove, stood staring up at him, arms akimbo. Nothing. Nothing? You've been shouting. The other workers stared at him. I was having a vision. Oh, a vision, Jashobeam threw back his head and laughed loudly. He waved his hands and called out to the others, Amos was having a vision. Some laughed. Some leaned out beneath the branches to grin at him. Jashobeam put his hands on his hips and looked up at him. Perhaps you need to come down and rest in the shade for a while. Too much heat, I would say. Go have a long, cool drink of water with a little wine. Face burning, Amos ducked his head. I'm fine. Clenching his teeth, he grasped another sycamore fig and made the small slice. A vision? Jashobeam shook his head. If you have another, try not to shout about it. You distract my workers, Jashobeam walked away. Amos was on his way home to Tekoa when the Lord spoke to him again. The people of Tyre have sinned again and again. I will not let them go unpunished. Dropping to his knees, Amos threw himself onto his face. Israelites stood in the court of the Phoenician king. The heads of state signed documents swearing a treaty of brotherhood and friendship between Phoenicia and Israel. But the Phoenicians raided and took whole villages captive to Edom, selling them as slaves. Amos slammed his fist on the ground. They tricked us. They broke their word. God's wrath descended in a spear of flame that set the great city of Tyre on fire. The mighty fortress crumbled into the inferno. There was no respite for Amos this time as the fourth vision came. Edomites with raised swords chased down the Israelite brothers. Every face was like Esau's, filled with bitterness and hatred against his brother Jacob. With generation after generation of them raised on the story of how the younger brother had bought the elder's birthright with a bowl of lentil soup and stripped Esau of his blessing. They sought every opportunity to inflict pain and suffering on Jacob's descendants. They savored revenge like a sweet dessert, not knowing it would turn their souls sour with poison. Wailing to heaven, Amos gripped his head. Stop, Lord. I don't want to see anymore. The Edomites caught up with and cut down the fleeing Israelite men. With cries of jubilance and triumph, they stabbed and slashed them, giving free rein to years of pent-up jealousy and rage. So I will send down fire on Teman, and the fortress of Bozrah will be destroyed. Amos watched punishment come upon Esau's sons. The horror of it made him collapse. He spread his arms, clutching the grass, his cheek pressed against the soft earth. He wandered for days, not unsure what to do. Why do you show me these things, Lord? What am I to do with this knowledge? Tell me. The Lord did not answer. Distraught, burdened by the images of destruction, Amos headed again for Tekoa. He climbed the mountain road from Jericho and took shelter for the night in a small cave. He could look out over the Sea of Salt. To the north were the mountains of Arman. To the south was Moab. The people of Ammon have sinned again, and I will not let them go unpunished. Terror gripped Amos as he dwelt within the vision. All of his senses awakened. He smelled the smoke of Gilead, the burning flesh. He tasted ash in his mouth. Ammonite warriors attacked Gilead. Lungs straining, he ran to the fleeing Israelites. Gilead burned, but even this destruction did not satisfy the Ammonites, who sought to wipe out the race by knocking pregnant women to the ground. As the women screamed for mercy, the warriors ripped their clothing and cut their bellies open with their swords to kill their unborn children. Amos screamed, "Why do you stand idly by? Why are you silent? Don't you see your enemies killing your people?" Tears poured down his cheeks as he raged. "Do to them what you did to Egypt and the Midianites. Crush their pride. Destroy them. See what I will do." Fire descended on Rabbah, blazing through the fortress until they crumbled. Battle cries rose like a whirlwind in a mighty storm, and the Ammonites fell, thousands of them, until only a remnant remained. When the battle ended, the king and his princes were fitted with yokes and led away to slavery. "Yes, Lord," Amos raised his hands. "Let all the nations see you're supreme over all the earth." Another vision came in the wake of Amon's destruction. Moabites opened the graves of Edom's kings and piled up the bones to burn. When the fires grew cold, workers scraped and swept the lime ashes into vats, where they pounded what remained to dust that they used to make plaster. Amos watched in horror and disgust as the Moabites coated their houses with the bones of Edom's kings. Not even in death are their victims shown mercy, Amos shouted. Before his eyes, an army attacked Moab. Foreign warriors shouted, ram's horns blew, flames reached into the sky as Kirioth burned while the people of Moab fell in the noise of battle. Neither their king nor their princes survived the slaughter. Those who had taken the bones of the dead from the tombs would never rest in one. The enemies of Israel would fall. Those who thought they held power would become powerless. God would avenge those who had been skinned alive, those who had been executed, their heads stacked as trophies before the Armenian gates. No more would Philistia profit on slave trade. No more would Phoenicia break treaties of peace and take whole villages captive into slavery. No more would Edom grow rich on revenge. All of them would die, having drunk the poison of lust and hatred from Damascus to Ammon and Moab, begun by Lot's incestuous daughters. All of them would be crushed like scorpions beneath the heel of God's anger. A deep satisfaction filled Amos at the thought of their destruction. Exhausted, Amos curled on his side in the shallow cave, comforted. When, Lord? When will it happen? Soon, he hoped. He would relish the sight of it. And that's the end of part 1.